when we could, but also leaving the board that we created the room to ask and answer questions that we couldn't anticipate in the legislation. I'd give that as one of the keys for us. We have set up a way that allows people to have a pretty simple and easy experience, and we were intentional in doing that in 2 pilot phases before we have sort of full rollout. Now we have, in the form of 2 pilots, just over 1,000 people participating. And since July, when that started, those people have collectively saved a little over $170,000. That's averaging about $60 per pay period. So we feel like we're on the path. And in January, we will start rolling this out to the larger employers first. Every few months, we'll go down that spectrum. So in January, this will become live for employers in Oregon who have more than 100 employees and who do not offer another retirement plan option. So that kind of gets you up to the current, and I want to share just a few quick lessons in kind of 2 categories. One, the effect, and 2, some policy implications for those of you who are thinking about these. One is really important that small businesses want this. My friends in Oregon are tired of hearing me tell the story about the sandwich shop in the district that I used to represent in the legislature. You probably all have this kind of an institution in your communities, the place where everybody goes. It's the iconic small business where the proprietor has been doing it for a long time and knows everybody in the community. Everybody knows him. It's Cheers with sandwiches. And this guy, Chuck Wilson, says it really well. He said, I want to do this for my employees, but I don't have an HR department. I got sandwiches to make. And so we've heard that experience around Oregon. We've heard it, as has already been mentioned, as a source of competitive parity to give people the chance to offer this benefit. But I think it's important to remember the altruistic nature, too, that employees or employers want to do this for their employees. The second is the effect that it's having on the financial service marketplace as well. We've had a number of instances where employers report that they were thinking about this. They had wanted to do this, but our program is sort of giving them the nudge to actually get it done. And if nothing else, financial service providers now have the platform to go to employers and say, you have to do something. We can offer you another plan. And from our perspective, that's a perfectly fine outcome. To have more people with access to retirement savings plans are a very good thing. Now, as regards policy, we have more things to do. We worked really hard to make sure that we were minimizing the impact on employers, but we are now facing a lawsuit by some employers who, while they say that they support the goals of the program, they don't believe that we should be able to require any steps for them to register. We've set up a plan that would ask them to say, we offer another plan, and then they would be exempt. The process takes between 30 seconds and 2 minutes. That lawsuit is ongoing, so that's a note of caution. The other is to make sure we have some real pressure to make sure that we're moving as quickly as possible to financial self-sufficiency. We were really clear with the legislature that this is not going to be a cost to taxpayers over time. We're using general fund supported loans to get started, but we're obviously facing pressure from the legislature to get on a path to repaying those loans as quickly as possible. And I think in that respect, those of you who are considering these sorts of plans have to keep that in mind as you work with your partners and providers. Seek out those partners who understand the mission and the legal constraints. A lot of forces that are seeking to limit the effectiveness and expansion of these kinds of approaches. And that requires a lot of flexibility, a lot of trust and collaboration between all the people that are involved. So I would say it's really important to not get high-centered and to be willing to address the challenges that come up and not get stuck on what might have been the case 12 or 18 months in the past. In that respect, it's also important to remember how quickly the landscape can change. And we, of course, were very happy about the Labor Department rule that clarified the effect that ERISA would have on these state-based programs. Disappointed that the Congress elected to rescind that, but we still believe we are well within the safe harbor of the original ERISA legislation. But that's another example of where flexibility and adaptability can be really important. It might have been naive, I will confess, of me to think that focusing on making it easier for people to save for their retirement and take control of their own financial future would be a bipartisan issue. I confess to perhaps being a bit naive on that. But I don't think it makes it any less important. And I still struggle to understand why people would want to make it more difficult for people to do that. It's in all of our interests, and even if someone's only interest is in smaller government, I think this is a route to that by giving people a chance to accumulate their own assets and be less of a draw on our social safety nets. But I'm still hopeful. I think we're on a good path, and I definitely want to acknowledge our colleagues in California and Illinois, Connecticut, Maryland, all these other places. We're part of a community that I think is trying to take this on, and that includes all of you. So I am glad to be here, glad to be part of this discussion, and of course I hope it need not be said that we are interested in Oregon and being helpful to anyone else who wants to take this on. I think we hopefully will all be back together on a regular basis, thanks to Aspen and Pew and BPC and Prudential and others to celebrate these things as they're on their way. So thank you very much for letting me be here. And to Jamie.
Good day. My name is Jamie Kalamarides, and I'm from Prudential. I want to thank Treasurer Reed for those great remarks about describing what's happening at the state level, and for the first panel for describing the challenges and some of the opportunities in the research. Very grateful to Aspen and the Bipartisan Policy Center and for Pew for sponsoring this event. I'd like to talk about 5 items. First, why this even matters. Second, what the unmet needs of employers are. Third, what the opportunity and who's going to benefit from this. And then I want to narrow in on solutions at the federal level, knowing that the next panel is going to talk about technology and some of the state solutions. And then I want to discuss very briefly, if we're talking about coverage, what else should we be talking about for small business workers? I'm going to make some very simple statements. First, savings at the workplace matters. Why? Because work and wealth are inextricably connected. People earn their income at work. This sounds silly, but needs to be said. Not only that, wealth, and what I mean by wealth is when I refer to that asset building language of what's the balance sheet of individuals, wealth is accumulated through the workplace when there are benefits offered. When there is a retirement plan available, families have 15 to 16 times more wealth than those families who work at workplaces without retirement benefits. 15 to 16 times more wealth, assets. And 80% of CFOs agree that if their employees are financially secure, they will be more engaged at work and therefore be better workers. It makes sense that work and wealth are connected. So in many ways, while we're talking about policy and technology and local and federal solutions, we also need to call on employers to re-engage in the conversation of work and wealth. Now, the challenge is many small employers, and we've talked about this, are not experts in this. They are, in effect, consumers themselves. And small businesses, from our research, and it supports the research that others have said, don't offer retirement plans for 3 reasons. It costs too much relative to retail products. It is administratively a hassle, and they have a fiduciary responsibility. We have a law called ERISA that makes small business owners personally responsible. It pierces the veil of whatever legal entity they have, that if they do something wrong, all of their savings, all of their network, their house can be liable for what they do wrong in the process. And the GAO reports and many other reports support this. So who works at small businesses? There are 55 million Americans who work at small businesses. Small businesses are the fastest growing area for new jobs. Those 55 million small business workers, 30 million of them are women. 22 million of them are people of color. This is a public policy area for everyone to tackle. Of those 22 million people of color, 12 are Latino, 6 are African American, 4 are Asian American. 4 million are Asian American. So there are lots of solutions underway, and I want to applaud all the solutions because I don't think a one-size-fits-all approach matters. But I want to focus on 2 federal solutions and comment on them. First, I want to talk about the MyRA, and regardless of what your opinion is on it, and I want to thank Mark for his leadership on it in particular, there are some lessons that we can all learn from the progress of it. First lesson is simplicity matters. The MyRA had one investment. It was very simple for what the individual could invest in. Stability matters, especially for new investors. The MyRA offered guarantee of principal and interest, and I would suggest that that sort of offering is very helpful for new investors who are concerned about capital volatility that they can experience in equity markets early as they're saving and gaining confidence. Volatility really matters when you're young, but if you're scared and you're not sure that money's going to be there and you want it to be proven, stability matters. This third lesson is scale. Unfortunately, the MyRA did not get the chance to get to scale. Reports suggest with 20,000 users, it required almost $300 per person to be able to pay for that over the course of the year. And you could argue that it didn't have enough time to get to scale or that it was not an effective economic environment, but the lesson learned is that we need to get to scale. I think the fourth lesson is the flip side of that, and that is we have to have persistence. We have to allow the programs to grow. The savers had accumulated $500, which is better than 1/6 of the American population in terms of savings. So the MyRA, even though it only affected 20,000, got those people better than 1/6, the worst 1/6 of the U.S. population that does not have $500 saved. I think that the other piece is, another lesson is we have to continue to market. We have to think about user experience and changing people's behavior. We have to think about auto-enrollment capabilities, which the MyRA was not allowed to do because of the laws and the particular fast approach that it was taking using an IRA solution. And as Treasurer Reed had suggested, bipartisan solutions are more sustainable. This did not survive because of the partisan aspect of it, but bipartisan solutions are absolutely possible, and we'll talk about them. So now I want to flip and talk about open multiple employer plans. These are often called pooled employer plans as well. And we can make small changes to federal law that will have enormous benefits to small businesses and their workers by simply allowing small businesses to pool their purchasing power and act like a medium and large size business. Because guess where 401ks and similar products are working? They're working in small, medium, and large businesses. People are saving. They're benefiting from automatic enrollment, automatic escalation. So multiple small employer plans would allow small businesses to pool their purchasing power. They can get scale in a commercial environment. They can do it with simplicity. The laws and the bills that are being considered remove the one bad apple rule that requires every individual right now to be jointly and severally liable. It keeps the fiduciary responsibility with professionals. It retains all the consumer protections of the 401k plans in ERISA. And if the bills that contain a model plan approach are passed and the Department of Labor and Treasury write a model plan design for multiple employer plans, that'll create simplicity. It'll create standardization of plan design, and providers like Prudential and our worthy competitors will compete on service, price, and investment performance, not on plan design. Instead, there'll be best practices of plan design. Now, multiple employer plans are bipartisan. They're supported by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Key concepts are supported by AARP, by affinity groups, by the industry. And in today's somewhat crazy environment, they are a very bipartisan solution. They've gone through regular order in the Senate. A bill has been passed in the Senate Finance Committee last Congress, 26-0. That included multiple employer plans. We don't hear about regular order process on tax-related and retirement things, and so this is on the stages of developing. And just to emphasize this even more, multiple employer plans have been included in every bill related to coverage in Congress, in the 115th Congress, in the 114th Congress, and in the 113th Congress. Every bill related to retirement coverage, and there are many. There are sponsors of Buchanan and Neal and Hatch and Wyden and Collins and Nelson and Kind and Renacci and Harkin and Brown. It keeps going on. This is a bipartisan idea. My last comment, coverage is not enough. If we're going to provide coverage to small business workers, they don't want to just accumulate assets, they want lifetime income. And it turns out that all of these bills also touch upon lifetime income. We should not settle for just coverage. We should also make sure that we're giving people the tools to generate lifetime income. And it turns out, and we were talking about it a little bit on the first panel, individuals are concerned about their future only if they also have control over their present day and over the unexpected bumps of managing risks in today and managing their student debt. And we have an opportunity to raise the dialogue around entirely financial wellness. Clearly, let's focus the rest of the conversation today on coverage, maybe bring in a little bit of income. But the challenges are definitely solvable. Now's the time to act from a public policy point of view so we can also enable the technology and the user experience. Thanks so much. Oh, and I'm supposed to introduce. Ida in the next panel.
Thanks, Jamie. So we can go ahead and invite the rest of the panel up for panel 2. I think I'm supposed to sit here. No, go to oh, there's 5 of us. Yeah, go ahead. Is this the one I have to sit in for the mic? Okay, I'll sit on the end. Okay. Right, lots of great tweeting happening, and I keep trying to keep up with the conversation and my Twitter feed. And multitasking is never my strong suit, so. But I encourage you to continue to use Small Business Retire and get into conversations with each other in this work. And we'll get into a much deeper conversation about solutions as we go now. So I'm Ida Rademacher. I'm the Vice President at the Aspen Institute and the Director of the Financial Security Program here. And it's great to see such a full house on a very different take on the retirement coverage conversation than the one that we're seeing in Washington on a daily basis these days. And I want to thank everybody who's on this panel, and I'll introduce everybody in a second, but folks in the room for making time to think about pragmatic solutions to a really critical problem in U.S. policy and in people's everyday lives. One of the things that I love about just the timing of this event is that even as there is a tax policy, tax reform conversation going on that has very little to do with retirement, tax policy is usually the one place where we get to talk about retirement. It's the one place where it's a flashpoint. And this time around, it's not even that. We can't even really use that leverage point in a very productive way. Even the incredible conversations that are happening about whether the incentives stay or whether they go is less than the tip of the iceberg about what we really need to be grappling with as a country in terms of the level of insecurity, financial insecurity facing U.S. households going forward in this country. So the nice part is that at Aspen, we like to showcase leadership. We like to showcase people rolling up their sleeves and getting it done. And we love to collaborate with great partners like Pew and the Bipartisan Policy Center to do that as well. And most importantly, we love to be able to have an opportunity like this to bring in many of the leaders from the private sector and policy innovators and people that are on the ground working with consumers and small businesses every day to really help to put a broader set of context around how do we solve this problem. There are literally hundreds of industry providers finding pragmatic solutions and enrolling thousands and thousands of employers every day into retirement plans. There are back-end technology solutions that are advancing. There are policy innovations happening at the state level advancing. And we, I think, don't often enough go ahead and roll this up and say, what do we know that's different now than the kind of stale conversation we were having about coverage 10 years ago? We have a lot of different providers, a lot of different innovators in that space. And so this conversation is going to build on the earlier one and really get into some of the ecosystem of new solutions that are happening, both in terms of the market-making policy paradigms that are happening at the state level, and the kinds of new technology platforms that are doing much of what Jamie said, simplifying, figuring out ways for stability, figuring out ways to think about the new kinds of intermediaries and platforms that can make this easier for workers. And also, I think, how that is actually connected, how the policy work and the industry work can actually create a lot of the solutions to the numbers. As David Mitchell wrote in the recap, when we did a small business retirement series, blog series earlier this year, which many of the folks in this room wrote pieces on, of the 55 million Americans that don't have coverage, 32 million of them work for small businesses. So this particular piece of coverage is a huge piece of it. And on the panel with me today are people who have really deep insights into how to think about specifically that marketplace and how to address it and serve it and solve these problems. So without further ado, I want to introduce, let me just try to go from the end here. We've got Bill Guillochot, who's the president and CEO of Ascensus. And again, you've got full bios for everybody here. This is an amazing panel. I'm so excited. We had such a good conversation prepping for this panel that I got on the wrong train. And like literally on Friday, I was just talking and gesticulating wildly, and I got on the wrong train. And when I saw my train pass me, I was like, oh. I'm on that train. So that's how I know we're going to have a great conversation today. So to Bob's left is Jeff Rosenberger, who's the Chief Operating Officer at Guideline. And to his left is Paul Davidson, who's the Director of Human Resource Services at Paychex, and I think even more specifically, really kind of built out a lot of the retirement business line at Paychex. And then beside me is Katie Solinsky, who about 6 months ago, was appointed as the Executive Director of the California Secure Choice. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and get started with, after I teed that up maybe a little bit too verbosely, how you all see the work that you do as creating this kind of broader solution, how it contributes to this solution to the small business coverage gap. And Paul, we can start all the way down with Bob with you if you'd like.
Sure, Ida. So I think all that we're talking about today is critically important, and it is sort of smack dab in the middle of what a census is all about as an organization. Our business is all about helping Americans save for some of life's most important things, whether it's their own retirement, their own health care, their children or grandchildren's college education, or for dependents with disabilities. We do that for 7 million Americans, and within the retirement market, we serve more than 50,000 U.S. employers who today are offering a qualified retirement plan to their employees. Germane to today's discussion, 80% of those plans are with employers that have 50 or fewer employees. So I think we have a pretty close view into what's going on in the small employer market. We were also fortunate enough to have been selected by both Oregon and Illinois as the program administrator for their, the Oregon Saves program and the Illinois Secure Choice program. And, I think that, as everyone knows all too well, the coverage issue is a very, very significant one. I think that the sort of the public-private partnership that exists with some of the state-sponsored programs, I think, is going to really spark a greater degree of coverage for sure. But as Treasurer Reed has mentioned, and in California and Illinois, I think all those states recognize that another great outcome of this will be that it sort of puts the issue front and center to small employers. You either have to enroll in the state-sponsored program or perhaps start your own, and Pew's research indicates that, half of the folks will start their own. And I think that will certainly go a long way towards kind of unlocking that small end of the employer market to being able to offer retirement benefits to their employees. On sort of a more positive note, though, just in the way the world exists today, if you looked at our business, and just in the month of October, we brought on 700 new employers' retirement plans. 35% of them were startups. We have seen a big uptick over the last few years in startup plans, which I think is obviously reflective of the fact that we're now, quite a few years of the Great Recession being in the rearview mirror. So I think, to John's earlier commentary, obviously as companies are around for a longer period of time and ultimately when they begin to have, greater financial capabilities, a retirement plan is something that they offer. However, that still represents a very, very small percentage of employers and their employees that truly need coverage. And that's where I think that the states have been very much out in front on this issue, and I think that sort of public-private partnership will provide a tremendous safety net for millions of American workers who have no coverage at all today.
Thanks. And Jeff, let me go to you because you're coming to this work almost without consideration of what was happening with those state public-private partnerships, seeing the business opportunity and seeing ways that technology could drive some greater portion of the solution. So why don't you say a little bit about kind of what your work is in this space?
Yeah, thanks, Ida. At Guideline, we're a pretty new company, 2.5-year-old company, so we've come at this with a pretty clean sheet of paper. And we take the perspective of, to your point on the growth in the startup plan market, we are very focused, almost exclusively focused on the access problem and going after the startup market. So the vast majority of our clients, small business owners or small businesses, are very, very small businesses starting their very first plan.
When you say very small, we've had many definitions where we're at today, so go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you can play around with the statistics a couple different ways, and it'll give you interesting sort of perspective on it. What I would say is we are focused on bringing that decision, to John's prior point in the prior panel, from a middle decision to an early decision, where it's like you get your payroll, and it may sound a little vulgar, but it's kind of like you get your payroll service, but would you like fries with that? Which is, can we get your 401k right there at that point? So, 5-person company starting up their very first plan is a great place.
Paul, you might want to put that into the Patriots marketing program.
I don't know if the marketing guys would go for that. But.
You guys will talk later. We'll figure this out.
Yeah, so we're just very focused on the access piece and getting people to make this decision. If historically they've made that decision, maybe 20 to 50 employees, and feeling like they've got a stable base to work off of, can we help bring that decision earlier into the evolution of the life of the company, where there may be 4, 5, 6 employees? And I think, to Holly's point earlier, I think a critical point into the credit of Paychex and what they've developed, I think having a payroll service is an underestimated piece of all this versus doing more manual-based payroll for these really small businesses. And part of our strategy, which I won't go into now, is to just focus on, can you tap into payroll? We focus on working with more of the cloud-based, more newer sort of payroll companies with that in mind.
Great, and I think in terms of the technology, and then we'll go to you, Paul. Your own decision to get into this, your personal decision to get into this, is part of it. So maybe you can just say a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I've worked in consumer finance for about 10 years. I previously was at Wealthfront, one of the really innovative players in the kind of robo-advisor space, and going out and talking to a number of early companies, and we focused on a little more of the mass affluent market there, and in the early stages, a lot of tech employees and serving them. I heard a lot from small businesses, and particularly in that case, it was a lot of tech companies saying, gosh, it'd be great if you could get us a really great 401k plan at 5, 10, 15 employees. We're not seeing that in the market the way that we look out at it. And so it was sort of a personal experience and evolution to get there. I joined the founders as an advisor early on in the company, and then joined full-time a little over a year ago.
Thanks. I mean, moving to you, Paul, the payroll piece of this was your starting point as well.
Sure.
But your numbers are impressive at this point. So why don't you say a little bit about kind of the role you're playing and the role you hope to play?
Sure. So Paychex grew up as a payroll company. Today we have about 600,000 companies using our payroll, which covers about 10 million people. When you look at the retirement plan, and Paychex has evolved, offering a whole array of employee benefits. But when you look at that client base, we have, because we do the payroll, we have a view into what they're doing and see who has a retirement plan, who doesn't. And we're very proud of the fact that we have 80,000 plans in the books. I believe that's more than anybody else. The majority of them are brand new startup plans. Our average size is in the teens. But as proud as we are of all that, when you look at our 600,000 clients, 80,000 of them have a plan with us, 90,000 have a plan with somebody else, and the other 70% have no plan at all. Mm-hmm. So we feel like there's a great opportunity there, and we feel like all those folks deserve the opportunity to save for a good retirement.
Yeah, I mean, Katie, I'm going to jump into this with you in a different way, because, I think when you just read the numbers from all three of the businesses on the panel, it's a story of excitement. It's a story of growth, huge growth opportunity, and more firms earlier in their life cycle getting retirement there. But then you actually you zoom back out and you look at the metadata, and you still realize that it's, what was the statistic earlier? Somebody said 17%. I'm looking at David. Of small businesses. 14%. Look, it went up 3% while we were talking. I mean, amazing. That it's still at scale an unsolved problem, even while there's opportunity in the marketplace. So there's a way that the states have envisioned needing to step in, a way that we all first envisioned a federal policy needing to step in some ways, to think about how do you actually close this gap or accelerate the closing of that gap. But say a little bit more, and I know that Treasurer Reed has spoken a little bit as well, but maybe say a little bit more from your perspective about what you see the job is in California and what the scale of the gap is that you might be able to address in California.
Sure, happy to do that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And it's great to be here to hear about all the innovation happening in the private sector as well. But our leadership in California, starting with Senator Kevin De Leon and then Treasurer John Chung, created Secure Choice because they identified a big gap in coverage. And in California, there are 7.5 million people who work but do not have access to a retirement savings vehicle at work. And we know, based on all the good research that was already cited earlier, that people are 15 times more likely to be on a path to retirement security if they have a way to save via automatic payroll deduction at work. And there's something about the power of doing that at work that is powerful. So of those 7.5 million people, 2/3 work for small businesses, and 2/3 are people of color. And we'll get to outreach more later in the panel, I think. But our leadership identified that as an issue and decided to step in with an innovation. So I think one important point that I want to make today is that our state law that authorized Secure Choice first said small businesses in the state with 5 or more employees, you can comply with this new law by doing one of two things. Either go out onto the marketplace and find a plan just like you can today, or if you don't want to do that, provide access to Secure Choice. So, if the results of our state law were to be the market shifts and innovates and comes up with plans that are more appealing to employers, small businesses, and to employees, and if those employers choose to respond to our mandate by going with those plans, that's great. We would consider that a success. So I want to be really clear, and I think the Treasurer said that in his remarks, that we measure our success based on increased coverage, increased access to savings. So, Secure Choice will be figuring out a way to measure the broader improvement in access. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'd see it in some ways as you defining a new floor. Right?
Yep.
If the floor was nothing, the new floor is I have an automatic IRA. Employers can't contribute to it. So there's limitations in it, but at the same time, it is a starting point that is fundamentally different than nothing. And the set of options, nothing gets taken off the table except the idea that people don't have any retirement savings and connections to thinking about that long-term savings.
That's right. And we do think change is incremental. So I try to be careful to say that we do not promote Secure Choice as the panacea to the retirement security crisis in this country or in California. It's an automatic IRA. The contribution limit is $5,500 a year, as you all know, and there's no employer match. So we think that it is a massive step forward, and it's opening up access to 7 million new people in California, hopefully. But if an employer wanted to choose a 401k with a higher contribution limit and a match,
and there
that'd
are
be
tax
great.
incentives to do it. And
Yeah.
I mean, it makes the entire. We talk in a lot of the other parts of the asset building field about the teachable moments. People getting a first job and getting their first paycheck is an excellent time to intervene and talk about getting banked, and things like that. Tax time is an excellent primed time when people are thinking about this. This kind of creates, forces a crucible moment for employers to consider something that they may have And I would say that, you know, I'm channeling, even as we're up here, I'm mindful of everything Jamie just said and many others in the room about open MEPs, and Jim, as you as well. So I think another, you know, piece of this pie about addressing the issues at scale is, you know, what are the ways that you can aggregate the concerns and kind of mitigate some of the costs and the headaches for small businesses in ways that actually aren't represented on the panel, but are in the room, and we'll have those conversations as well. But let me put a question to all of you. And it has a little bit to do with what Katie just said, and a little bit to do with what's different about what you're doing now. So on the one hand, we know that there have been solutions out there for small businesses for a very long time. There's SEPs, there's Simples, there's many solutions that have been on the books of companies to serve small employers for a long time. And now there's a whole new wave of solutions that are really technology driven or you know, keying off of the payroll system in that moment. So do we already have enough for the market to address the challenge, or do we actually need this additional level of requirement as leverage to truly make a dent on providing a solution that hits at scale for workers and small businesses? So kind of this you know, I don't want to call it a mandate. It's a, you know, but it is a requirement issue. Do we need it to make this stuff work? Do you think technology can answer it? Is it actually stronger together? What are people's perspectives on this?
Well, look, mandate obviously is a tough word for some parts of the country and where we're sitting today. I think clearly it would go a long way towards solving the problem, assuming it was politically viable, which I don't think that it really is. You know, I think the reality is that for the most part, you know, plans are sold versus bought. Now, obviously, you know, Jeff's firm obviously is you know, targeting small employers with you know, who are tech savvy with easy access via the web. And I think that for a certain segment of the employer population, that could be a very viable means of promoting, you know, a cost-effective solution. I think there's, you know, a number of organizations we have similar type of capabilities, but yet there are still a lot of folks that when they're sort of going through, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a small business owner, that this is not, you know, there's a lot of research shared in the first panel, you know, that this is not top of mind. You know, I applaud Holly's sister who had the opportunity to decline bonus and opt for the retirement plan to her business owner. I think that she's probably spent time with her sister and is more aware of the issue, and so therefore that was her answer. I don't know that the whole population of that employer would have followed suit. So, you know, that's one of the reasons why, you know, Jamie's comments around open MEPs, you know, I think that could be effective for sure around some degree of easing of administrative burden, you know, sort of mass buying power. But you still have the issue around someone saying, hey, you know what, I'm actually going to become a part of the MEP or sponsor a plan. You know, you sort of need that spark to drive it. You know, and that's why, you know, again, speaking for the 2,000 people that make up the census team, why we're so bullish and supportive of what the states are doing, because whether or not it represents that new floor, as you described it, Ida, but in any event, it's a triggering event. People need to make a proactive decision as the employer to either participate in the state program or perhaps to offer their own plan. Now, that may be their own plan and their own plan document, or, you know, if open MEPs ultimately come to pass, you know, maybe they could join one of those. But I do think that in a world where plans are still really sold versus being bought, you need some kind of triggering event, because that small end of the market for most of the folks who are doing the selling, you know, who are financial intermediaries, you have to be very altruistic when your fees are generally coming off of assets when there's none in a plan. So, you know, that I think is what the state, you know, sort of the public-private partnership, I think could be a very effective one.
Great. Other perspectives here?
Yeah, I take the perspective of the answer is probably B, all of the above. We're supportive of all the state programs and the different forms. I'm a little skeptical that the programs without a mandate will get scale, but I'm willing to be surprised. So it'll be interesting to see how the different state programs roll out. But we're very supportive of the different models and to some degree competing against them on a healthy level of like, if your small business would be better served with the 401k because of the higher contribution limits, et cetera, and matching, then that's great. If your small business would be better served with a state-run program like Secure Choice or Oregon Saves, we're supportive of that as well. On the point about 401k plans or retirement services are largely sold rather than bought, I would be a little careful there, and I appreciate that I'm coming from the kind of like other coast perspective on that a little bit. And maybe echoing the question that Jim Gatz from Treasury asked in the first panel, which is there some demographic things afoot here on how younger small business owners make these decisions? And I would argue that there probably are. There's also sort of this elephant in the room, which is the internet, which is buyers are much more educating themselves in their own time. So the notion of having to be sold plans in all segments of the market will need to be sold plans going forward. I'm not sure I totally subscribe to that. We are very much in the segment that, and we're still very small compared to either of the two other private market players represented up here, so we can have the luxury of focusing on folks that will just buy rather than be sold. But selling is more expensive than buying, so it comes with a certain level of additional cost. So if you can use the internet and make things easier, make it a lot easier for people to buy, we may be able to get to the core factors that cause the access gap, which are complexity and cost. So that's the perspective we take. Will the whole market be buying retirement services rather than being sold them in 10 years from now? Probably not. But I do think the market with the internet and younger millennial business owners moving that direction, I think there will be a sort of sea change there.
Great, thanks. Paul?
So 2 points I'd like to make when you think of the public sector plans. One is I hope the rules will allow the private and public sector to compete evenly. And two, we get excited about the states going forward because a mandatory plan is just going to help us. It's even hard for us to look at California, and if all those people have to get a plan in 24 months or something, how would we even handle all the volume? So I don't want to act like we're not excited about it, but I do hope that we can stay on equal footing because part of the thing that drives our cost today is the mandated costs, right? The cost of having a plan, the compliance. And if some of that goes away, I think even without a mandate, participation would triple, quadruple in a very short period of time.
Let's double down on the cost thing because you just mentioned it. We just heard that selling is more expensive than buying. That when you just drill right into it, Jeff, cost and complexity are at the heart of the gap that we see in terms of the small business group. So from all of your perspectives, the plan fees have historically been so much higher for small businesses. Either from a technology-driven way to drive down costs or from kind of a policy market-making, public-private. What do you see play out as the future of costs for small businesses, either because these things work together or because it was already going to happen? I don't know, but I'd just love to have a little bit more from each of your perspectives on the cost equation for small businesses and where that fits into their decision-making and how your solutions facilitate maybe a different outcome. And do you want to start?
Sure. So just to be clear, the employer will have zero financial costs, zero fees to participate in Secure Choice. That is not to say that it won't require some amount of time or administrative costs to facilitate the contributions, but we think that's one of the reasons that this is going to be so appealing for them. And from the employee's perspective, our statute caps fees at 1%. We hope that our fees will be much, much lower than that, at least eventually. And I do get the question every now and then from folks in industry saying, well, do you think that your existence will cause some employers to ditch the plans that they already have and move to yours because it's so easy and it's cheap for them? And I think my first instinct on that is to say that I think If it means that they would be moving from a situation where they had a 401k with a match to secure choice, that would be a risk, I think, on their part, because it would be a reduction in compensation, essentially. So unless they modified the entire kind of comprehensive compensation package, I don't really see that happening. But I do hope that by bringing 7 million new accounts into this market, and by using our leverage as and volume with the state of California, and keeping fees statutorily capped, that we can have a positive impact on fees in the market.
Yeah. Any one of you have up for grabs?
I mean, I would say there's probably some commonality across our three firms, because we're technology-enabled services businesses, not asset managers. I can speak for a census. I mean, we need to be able to make money from providing explicit, fully transparent pricing to small employers, and always have been since the founding of the company. So it was really purpose-built to do that. I think that if you're sort of a bundled provider, or there's an asset management component there, there are certain fixed costs, especially if you're not used to providing services to small average account balances. The basis points equivalent, can become a pretty big number in the small market until plans start to grow. So I think that, for a firm like Jeff's or Paul's, with, the focus on being able to provide the cost at a really aggressive price point for small employers, I think is a big driver of the success of all three of those organizations. I do think historically, small plans did pay more, at least as expressed as basis points, at least until the assets got to be larger from the folks who are in the business primarily to manage money, as opposed to organizations that are there to provide simply the service and make investment products available.
We are a bundled provider, to your point. Like our model is very much put everything in the box, so the small business owner doesn't have to go out and find other third-party service providers to add in and get connected into the whole mix of what their solution is for their employees. We're also of the view, out in Silicon Valley, we talk about sort of the consumerization of the enterprise. And it's just this notion of trying to make the user experience on software so much more easy and accessible for the small business owner to offer the service, whether it's 401k or payroll or even communication services. Slack is a really interesting example if people have used that. That's a communication tool in Silicon Valley that grew alarmingly fast, like amazingly fast, in part because they just made it really, really easy and accessible. And so our view is, can you take this notion of consumerizing what has historically been B2B or enterprise software services and make it very easy for people to adopt? And one element of that is actually the pricing structure as well. So we are a bundled provider. We're a registered investment advisor. We're an asset manager. But we view ourselves in many ways as a software company or a technology company. So we price the way that people are buying these, small business owners are buying these other services, including payroll in many cases, where it's on a per seat, or in the 401k space, per participant basis. So it's basically $100 a year for each participant in the plan. And to distinguish against the state-run plans, that is a cost borne by the employers. Mm-hmm. So they have to say, I want to offer this benefit because I'm competing for talent or my employees are demanding it. So it's $8 a month, or about $100 a year for each participant, and the employer covers that. And then the employees, we don't put any asset management fees on top of that. They're just getting the underlying mix of low-cost index funds, which are right now 6 or 7 basis points, and that's all they pay for. So to some degree, if you think about our model versus the kind of more traditional asset-based pricing model, we're almost a little more expensive at the very beginning, given most of our plans are de novo or startup plans. Mm-hmm. But then the people signing up with us appreciate that we're going to give them the economies of scale over time, as they notionally are getting more bang for their buck on driving more assets into the plan, and our fees stay fixed on a monthly subscription basis rather than an asset basis.
Jeff, one quick question for you. Sure. I mean, because sort of the pricing numbers that you equated to on a per participant basis, for very small plans, very, very much in line with what we do. Yeah. And we give employers the option as to whether or not they want to pay for it, or there's many different mechanisms to charge it back to the participants. So if an employer is not willing to actually pay for that, are you guys saying, we won't, go find somebody else?
Yeah, we're mindful about what we have kind of religion on in this space to some degree, and the things we have religion on are, we're going to focus on the part of the market, and we're small, much smaller than either of your firms, so we have the luxury of saying we're going to be very targeted at this point and say, like, we want to work with small businesses that are willing, and in a position, quite frankly, to pay for this benefit, and if they're not, then they're not right for us. One of the other areas where we have some religion is auto-enrollment. All our plans are auto-enrolled because we believe participation is really important, particularly for younger and lower-paid workers.
And the benefits of that are tremendous. We partner with lots and lots of big financial institutions where we're the service provider and technology provider underneath. So we don't have unfortunately, we don't really have the luxury to say, hey, you have to offer auto enrollment. But I think obviously it's a great idea.
And the success you've had, like I'm mindful of, like the Vanguard plan. I know Census is the record keeper on that. It had a lot of tremendous amount of success in the small plan. A little more of the there's a startup segment to it, but also some existing plans. And it's like the auto enrollment is clearly working there. And I think everyone that's looked at the data has come to that. Mm-hmm. So we were able, with a clean sheet of paper 2.5 years ago, to say, like, all our plans are auto enrolled.
Great.
I'd just like to build on the points both my panelists made. First of all, we think of our cost in two ways, or the cost to employer in two ways. One, their time. And we have pretty much automated the process today that can truly be a hands-off process. From the payroll all the way through the compliance testing to the 5,500, they can pretty much just walk away from it all. So we feel like that's taken us a long time. We're very proud of that. The second part of the cost is what I charge to the employer. So that's the part I would like it to be less, and if there were less requirements around us, we could probably lower the price. And then the third part about it is how to charge the cost, kind of what you're referring to. We don't really care how you pay us as long as you pay us. So whether it's a per participant fee or an asset fee, we kind of stay agnostic to it.
Do you manage both kinds?
We do manage certainly both kinds. In fact, today the plan that sells the most, they can choose any mutual fund they want, and any money that it pays to us or to the broker, we credit back to the individual participants. And if there wants to be a fee, we just disclose it right there as the fee. And then that way the employer kind of decides how much he wants to pay us monthly, how much he wants to come out of the assets.
I think when I think about this, Katie, was a lot of this part of what went into the decisions about where the caps were in your plan? You're kind of looking at the future directions of where the industry is going?
Yep.
So do you think it's driving even more competition or driving down cost to where you set it? Or are you confident that you're going to have applicants to provide in your system that are going to be able to meet that?
We hope so.
Yeah,
we hope so. And most of that work was based on the analysis that was done in our feasibility study in 2016. But we do hope that it helps drive down costs in the market, in the broader market. And if we need to adjust our statutory cap, then we can do that as we go. But we'll give ourselves a chance to launch and see what happens and see what the effect is in the environment before we move forward with any other changes.
Right. I'm kind of now thinking back a little bit to, one, I've heard everybody in some ways supportive of the public-private partnership model. In some, I'll put my own cards on the table. I would love for us not to have to do 50 different versions of that before it becomes a federal policy conversation again. I don't know how quickly we can get there, and I think that it's imperative that when these public-private partnerships develop, that they succeed, right? So that we can learn. I think MyRA comes in as a place where it's an example of an incredibly important gap that was trying to be filled with something. But the vulnerability in a policy environment at the federal level right now for proactive solutions to happen. So I think that it's lovely that there's other fertile ground where proactive solutions are happening. We see them at the state level, and we see them in the marketplace. And I love that we see them with a lot of traditional players in the marketplace and also a lot of more new entrants into the marketplace. But when I think about this coverage gap, I want to get us back to the coverage gap and thinking a little bit about what John Scott was saying about the key research you found with employers who are still, not providing retirement. So I'd like to turn that. I think all of you do your own research in this area in some ways and have your own insights to add to it about what are the insights you have about when are the right engagement points, what are the barriers that you're overcoming more and more, but just an opportunity to share a little bit about some of the ways that your own insights dovetail with some of the early kind of table setting that we did today. And I don't know, Paul, if you'd like
Sure.
to get that started.
Yeah, a couple points I'd like to make. First of all, somebody was mentioning payroll earlier and the advantage of payroll, and I think really it's not so much that they have the payroll, it's that entrepreneur has a propensity to outsource. And so I think that person has much more likely to try to take on a plan. The fellow who would rather do it themselves instead of pay me $20 is probably not going to start a 401k. So there's some of that involved. Number two is we also talked about the maturity of the business. There is, and we see it because we sell a lot of different products. So when they start up, you need your payroll, you need your workers' comp, there's some things you have to have by law, and we can help you get there and get started. But in generally, at that point, many of those firms, their next investment isn't going to be in benefits, it's going to be in a new truck or a new oven, and you got to get through that hump to where they've got the business at a certain maturity level before I think they start thinking of benefits. And at that point, as mentioned earlier, I think health insurance is clearly first. And then a retirement comes very quickly after that.
Yeah, and I would actually go back to your point earlier on the attachment rate or implied attachment rate at Paychex. I think the numbers are sort of 600,000 payroll clients and 80,000 401k plans. I think that's a relevant data point. We work with a number of the smaller, kind of newer entrants into the sort of cloud-based payroll space. And it depends a little bit on the segment that they're focused on, but you find about the same kind of attachment rate on 401k. And I think you made an important distinction too, which is maybe we get 12 to 15, call it 15% attachment rate to your product, your retirement plan product, but there's another 15% that you can basically see of other providers into your clients with your payroll. And then 70% is the untapped part of it. So there's a lot of white space there, and that's consistent. Gusto, Zenefits, OnPay, a handful of our payroll clients, you see about, or payroll partners I should say, you see about the same mix, which is, we're working towards, if it's a dedicated partnership, towards that 15 or 20% attachment rate on 401k, and they might see another 15% of other providers. But the big thing is the white space in there of sort of 60 to 80% of their clients that don't have a plan today. And that's honestly what gets me out of bed and our team out of bed in the morning, because it's a pretty exciting opportunity. It's an access problem. It's a problem, but it's also an opportunity.
Yeah, I would totally concur with that. I mean, the greenfield opportunity for collectively, both the private sector, public sector, to go out and address this problem, because it's very sizable and it is a great societal issue, but it also represents a great business opportunity, quite honestly, for those that can participate in it. I mean, I think, our view, small view into the overall marketplace, encompasses 50,000 employers, and I think, the challenge still remains. I reference that sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and John's data around where does this fall, and it falls number 3 or number 4 sometimes, depending on who you ask. And we do the same kind of surveying of our world, and that is the unfortunate reality. So while I think it would be awesome if there could be some kind of a federal mandate, I think that just seems like a bridge too far at the moment. Obviously, at the state level, I think it's being done, and I think that it ultimately will be that spark to help drive better outcomes for so many people. But perhaps another tool, because I think this has to be sort of a multi-pronged approach to solve the problem, would be the open maps, and maybe a combination of those things, will change those numbers. That 55 million Americans that have no access to a workplace retirement plan, needs to come down. And I think using all these different tools that we've got available to us, for sure will change that. I mean, you think about California alone, with 7 million plus, 1 million in Oregon, 1.2 million in Illinois. That's a pretty big chunk out of the
Just words to get you
55
out
million.
there.
So.
Yeah, that's a good thing. What about you and your perspective on, I mean, you've done a lot of different focus groups. Is there any additional, so two things. I'm going to ask this. I'm going to ask all of you to, if you were able to know something else, if there's a research gap that would help you all with your businesses or with addressing this, think about that. And then we're going to come to questions from the audience. So that's going to tee up. So be thinking about your questions. But we've done a lot of focus groups. You've done a lot of research. Is there anything else that sticks out for you in terms of what you've learned that could be helpful to others in this room or in other places around the community you're serving?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with everything I've heard here. That the only thing I would add is just we get the feedback frequently and loudly that this, from the employer's perspective, that it needs to be designed in a way that's really, really simple and as administratively light for employers as possible. So I think that there is an eagerness out there and an excitement from small business owners that they're excited for the opportunity to offer a benefit that they currently can't or don't offer. So we get that positive feedback, but we also get the clear feedback that we need the employer's role to be as minimal as possible. So we're doing as much work as we can in the design phase before we move to outreach to be accommodating to that.
Yeah, and I know that's the process that Oregon has had to follow as well.
Yeah.
Really quickly, any particular gaps in the kinds of understanding of the market you're trying to serve, or limitations in the technology that you think are going to be brokered or broken through in the near future that should be on our radar screens?
No, I'm always fascinated by the question of motivation versus reducing friction. I just think human nature around consumer finance products is fascinating. I think most people in this room probably would echo that sentiment.
So personal motivation to do something versus just getting rid of the barriers.
Exactly. I mean, to John's point earlier, talking about what are the motivations for small businesses to offer a plan, I think that's really important. As I've gotten older and been in the area and the space longer, I appreciate even more the importance of just literally reducing friction. Simplify, put it right there. Again, fries with your hamburger. How do you make it as simple as possible and frictionless as possible? And I think that in some ways is sort of the behavioral economic view of it, is what actually drives behavior. So any more research around that, the role of motivation versus just purely taking points of friction out, I think is really interesting.
That's great.
Well, that point of friction component, just speaks to the power of saving through workplace-sponsored programs and the power of auto-enrollment, and that is the one thing I think everybody can agree has made a difference in the lives of, while there's 55 million Americans who aren't covered, there are 80 some odd million plus that are, and there's $25 trillion in retirement assets that have been accumulated. So some folks are doing okay, but a lot more need to.
Yeah. Any other insights or wish list stuff, you guys?
Well, just on a really pragmatic basis, we spend a lot of our time thinking about how to plan our outreach and marketing and education work, because I think we can all recognize that a program like Secure Choice is going to succeed based on how well we do all of that outreach and marketing. So to the extent that we can all sort of be innovative about the ways that we, in California, think about it not as a kind of monolithic group of 7 million people, but segment that into, we know for sure 2/3 work for small businesses, 2/3 are people of color in California, a lot of women. Latinos alone represent nearly half of our 7 million population. So, we're doing sort of extensive, in-depth engagement with our stakeholder and advocacy communities right now to help inform us on how do we be culturally competent, how do we not only educate but persuade that this is a program that we want people to not opt out of. So to the extent we can do research on effective marketing and outreach.
And is it primarily just to employers, or you're also looking at the employees when you're doing this?
Both.
You're doing both.
Absolutely. We're sort of putting a first priority on employers because they're the ones that are subject to the requirement, and we need them to fully understand what the program is and isn't. And I think to some extent, the advocates who worked so hard for so many years, for the past 8 or 9 years, to get the legislation passed, are doing a really, really good job right now already of kind of establishing grassroots education and outreach. But it's not quite as robust on the employer side right now, so we're trying to focus on that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Questions from the audience? A lot. So let's go back there and then to you, and then we'll come over here, sir.
Yeah.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, yeah. Carl Pulser again. Great ideas about aggregating employers either through the private sector, through these multiple employer organizations and states. But I think there are two elements to everybody getting in the system. One is the institutional setting, which is good here. The other is the money. It's the employees' money that comes out of their wages that goes into the retirement, and they don't have enough at the bottom half. So that brings up tax policy.
Yeah, the question?
Is there a role for redistributing the tax breaks that we now have, where for the bottom fifth of the population, they get about $20 of a tax break. For the top, about $4,500. If everybody had a $1,000 tax credit, there would be $50 billion in a new market for financial markets. And if the source of that money was from the top, the financial markets there wouldn't shrink at all. So I think the tax policy is important, and it's important even though it can't get passed now to bring it up.
No, it's
Okay?
great.
Tax
Go ahead and
policy.
get the other questions on the table, and then think about how you want to respond to any or all of these. Yes, so we'll go with Red, and then just over here, David, next. The gentleman with the tall guy, right here, behind me.
Yeah, hi, I'm Mindy Reiser. I spoke earlier. Jeff, this is for you, but other folks can chime in. We just heard there are $25 trillion in retirement assets. I'm wondering how the younger folks in the tech industry are interrogating where their money is being invested, okay? We have in this country lots of discussion about America first. We need to support American business. Retirement funds invest where there are interesting risks, interesting possibilities of profit. How are your folks, the well-educated techie guys and gals, looking at where their money is invested, and do they have priorities and no-nos?
Yeah, let me start. Oh, sorry.
Let's get the other question on here, and then because we've got a policy conversation, we've got a little bit of culture conversation around people's preferences around investments.
I'm John Turner from the Pension Policy Center, and my question is very closely related to the first question. I read a study recently which was surprising to me, but it said that a lot of people do not have, a lot of workers do not have any federal income tax liability. And I knew that was true, but the number was something like, it could be as high as 40% in some years. And so my question is, if there's no income tax incentive to participate in a pension, do you think these workers should participate, or do you think that they will? There's two parts of it.
So I'm going to do my best. Thank you, and then raise your hand so David can see if you've got other questions, because I think we have time for another round of questions here. The tax policy conversation is interesting because both of these, I think you're referring to the individual taxpayer with both of your questions, and we're talking right now about incenting small businesses, what incents them. So I'm going to add to your question. I'm going to say, on the one hand, how does tax policy, corporate tax policy or business tax policy, play into the decision making? And I think this is a question near and dear to our heart at Aspen, and I know many of the folks in the room. How do we think about changing some of the asymmetries, and who gets incented to save in this country and who doesn't, and what is a meaningful way to rethink that and to make it fair, just full stop. But that's a different question than the small business one, so feel free to opine on the second, but I think for your own kind of work, yeah, the first one might be more proximate to what you know about motivation and
well, one comment that's probably understood in the room, but just for the lowest income cohort of folks, assuming there's some kind of a solution in place by 2034, Social Security does provide a pretty substantial for lower income workers, income replacement ratio. So that social safety net,
let me push you on that for like. To what level? What do you think? What income quintile do you think that is true? Because I think this is one of those things we actually need to figure out?
Well, I would, yeah, in my mind, I'm thinking, folks that are making, say, $35,000 annually.
Okay. My own sense of that is it's going to change as more people are in gig jobs and 1099 jobs, and how many of them actually paid in to Social Security consistently and not. So
Yeah, and that is a big issue. The 55 million can be 75 million in terms of people who don't have access to a workplace plan if you include, the
Right.
burgeoning gig economy.
Right. So, but anyway, but I digress. Go ahead. Anybody?
Well, I think ultimately these are employer-sponsored plans, right? The business owners are the individuals that are looking at them as a benefit to, attract and retain their employees. Ultimately, the tax benefit status at the individual employee level is probably not the driver behind the owner's decision to offer a plan or not. The owners obviously have benefits associated with them, tax benefits that inure to them by offering a plan. But that alone isn't the only driver behind why companies have them. In fact, I know that John Scott's data actually, in my mind, actually was surprisingly low in terms of how much the tax advantage nature of a qualified retirement plan plays into the thinking among the decision makers that opt to offer one to their employees. But I think it's, I think it's an important component. But I think if you're an employee, you may say, okay, well, you know what? I'm not paying any income taxes this year. So the fact that I have this money taken out pre-tax, what does that really mean? I don't know. I don't know how many folks actually stop and think about it that way. I think they, particularly if there's a match, I think that people, are attracted to participating in the programs and that they can save for it. I'll give a very funny story. So my daughter, she was younger at the time. She was in high school. She never really knew exactly what I did. So, I think she thought I ran like nursing homes or something like that, places for people to retire, But she got to, go to work for a day and see what Dad does. And she and her friends were sitting out on the deck of our house, and she was like, wow, when we get out of school and get jobs, we have to go work at a company that offers these things called 401k plans. It's unbelievable. If you put money away, the company matches it. They give you money. They just give it to you. She was like totally inspired by it. And I think that I think hopefully is the mentality that a lot of employees will have if their company is actually sponsoring a plan. And I don't know whether, at her age she wasn't worried about income taxes, and I think that for a lot of employees that's probably not the first thing they think about either.
Let me switch to Katie here, and then I want to come back around the culture question, and we can say more. And we can also refer to you 10 other conversations that are going to happening in DC daily about the broader set of tax reform conversations as well. So I want to make sure we touch on it, but I want to make sure we get the other questions in as well.
Yeah, just very, very briefly on the employee's perspective, and particularly focused on the low-income folks, which I think was a thread in both of those questions. We're working really, really hard to design the program in a way that works for low-income people with very volatile income. So we have heard the feedback loud and clear from our stakeholders representing workers and labor and lower-income people that it's really important that people have access to their money in cases of emergency. So we are, staff are recommending to our board, and the board has not voted on it yet, that we go with a Roth IRA model following Oregon and Illinois' decision there, which of course is difficult because we're balancing the desire to motivate people and encourage people to save long-term and treat it like a long-term investment and not touch it, with the very, very strong feedback that we've gotten that, we're talking about people, many of whom are unbanked even, who are not used to saving, and it's going to be a deduction, and they need to, they will opt out if they don't think that they have access to that money. So that's one thing. And then another thing we're considering along those lines is something else that Oregon is doing with their capital preservation fund. So essentially having a sidecar fund of cash that is essentially more liquid that people can access. So I don't know if that was really the spirit of the questions, but it's something that we are thinking about in California and taking very, very seriously.
I mean, it's a whole different set of considerations, a whole different bundle than the one we're talking about up here. I think to think about how do lower income households and knowledge about how they earn and how they save or can't save, how you actually get them to be able to accumulate, you know. And so refundable credits, more aligned incentives, the sidecar accounts, understanding needs for liquidity, all of those things kind of coming together. Let's move to the, and we can switch this out, but this would really be the last. Ideally, we get answers on your question. If there's any other questions, we'll do them, but otherwise, just a final comment from you all, I think would be great. So, you know, in terms of this choice and where are people's investment preferences going, and is that driving some of the work? I guess that was mainly your question, right, in that way?
Yeah, the one clarifying point I would make, we do have a lot of technology startups as our clients. It's sort of, we shouldn't talk about the small business market as like a monolithic thing. There's sort of three segments. We have a lot of professional service firms, generally hire compensated folks, technology workers, and then the third is like a mix of everything else. We have clients in 49 states. All our new customer service people, one of the first questions we ask them is, do you speak Spanish? Because we have a good flow of small businesses in California that need that for their employees. So it is a broad mix. To your point on millennials and the investment products, I think they get the joke. I think they've figured out that for the most part, like financial products and investment products have been really expensive for a long time, and they are looking to find a way to drive that down. And you can see that in the asset flows, whether it's going to low-cost index funds or out of more expensive actively managed funds. I mean, Vanguard's pulling in like $1 billion a day, mostly in really low-income or low-cost mutual funds or index funds. So our model is to dive right into that. So it's the investment products or index funds that our end participants are using are 6 or 7 basis points. So they're paying $6 for every $10,000 that they have invested. That goes to the mutual fund companies that we work with to invest on behalf of our clients.
Were you asked about socially responsible investing, perhaps?
I'm interested in that.
Okay, I'll take a different angle. You guys may have something to add on that. I didn't realize that was a question.
Yeah, and briefly, yeah.
We hear that a lot.
Sorry.
We give them the choice. They can take a custom portfolio that has socially responsible funds in it. Only a very small minority actually do. So it comes up a lot, but in terms of actually where the people make their investment choices, it's a higher cost, and I think when they see that, they have second thoughts.
I think that's yes. There's a lot of talk around socially responsible investing. Oftentimes, you know, sponsors will have that in the lineup, but in terms of how much of the assets ultimately find their way into those investment vehicles, it's not as much as what you would expect based on how much it's talked about.
Right. So real fast, I guess, is a lightning round. Just sum up. You know, most people that talk to me know that one of my first questions will be looking at how far out should I look to solve this problem. You know, like what is the momentum for change? So I would love to ask you guys, 5 years out or 10 years out, how much of the coverage gap that we've been talking about today is realistically solvable, and what is the driving thing that would have made it different? Just you know, opine.
To me, I see the states driving it. I think that's the biggest impetus we're going to have out there, and as long as they continue to drive it, I think we'll continue to see quick and drastic change.
Great.
Yeah, I'm bullish on where things go over the next 10 years. I think the state programs, I think the rise of the millennials into their working career, professional careers, and then I think the internet in terms of small business owners and their employees educating themselves on their own time, I think will have a pretty big impact on this problem over the next 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I would concur what everybody said. I mean, just the 3 states alone, Oregon, Illinois, and California would sort of, you know, carve out, you know, almost 10 million out of the 55. That's a pretty good start.
Yep. You know, we have a 7.5 million person hole right now in California, and we hope within 10 years to have 6 million people in the program. So
No pressure, Katie.
Yep.
I'll have you back in 5 and talk about it. I want to just wrap up thanking this panel. Thank all of you for joining us and for sharing so much of your work. Also thanking Treasurer Reed and Jamie Kalamarides from Prudential for their work and remarks to frame up the solution buckets, as you will. Thanks to Pew and the Bipartisan Policy Center for partnering with Aspen's Financial Security Program on this, which was really fun, and we'll have to do it again. And the only reason I'll say that is because I want to thank specifically David Mitchell on my team for really orchestrating that and kind of driving a great work plan, and the rest of the team here for that as well. Thanks very much. We'll do recaps of this. We're going to continue to drill down on different specific ways that we can hit this coverage gap in America, and the growing number of leaders who are really stepping up to talk about what it's going to take to make the change is encouraging to me, and that's what gets me out of bed every day. So thanks to all of you, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure to meet you. Great to meet you. Yeah.
And Kim was just dreaming about California secure choice, and now you're here, the executive director.
I know, great. And I see you on Twitter all the time. Hello, hi.